Okay, so in this lesson we're going to have an overview of the Great Depression, how it affected Germany and the rise to power of Hitler and the Nazi parties, and the Nazi period and the Second World War. As I say, it's an overview. Don't worry about getting every single little detail down, but if you are a GCSE student, it'd be a good idea to draw a timeline of major events. Let's begin by looking at the Great Depression. By 1928, the world economy was heavily integrated. That meant that the US economy was crucial as the world's largest economy. If demand fell in the United States, if there was an economic crisis there, this would have a knock-on effect on other countries around the world, as all economies were essentially connected. Germany itself was heavily reliant for its economic prosperity on the Dawes loans, which had been negotiated with Gustav Stresemann and Charles Dawes in 1924. But by 1928, the warning signs were already there. The US economy was faltering. The market for consumer goods, such as cars and radios, was saturated. People already had them, so there wasn't much demand. And a lot of consumer purchases and purchases in the stock market were fueled by credit. And things fueled by credit can be unstable. And it's this situation that led to the Great Depression of the 1930s. Thankfully, it's never happened again since then. So let's have a look in a little bit of detail at the Great Depression. Wall Street crash is certainly identified by some as a factor which helped the world slide into it perhaps even more quickly. Stocks lost billions on the stock market. The thing perhaps more crucial though is what happened next was a wave of banks going bust. Banks went bankrupt. There were runs on the banks as consumers lost confidence. Fearing their bank might collapse, they rushed to withdraw their money, which caused the collapse of the bank to become certain. Banks in themselves, desperately short of cash, meant that German loans were called in very quickly. Within Germany itself, this had a massive impact as factories lost their source of credit, factories shut down, businesses collapsed, and by 1933, 6 million Germans were unemployed, 6 million of the labour force. That was actually 1 in 3 of the German labour force. Let's have a look at the period from 1929 to 1934, democracy to dictatorship. Again, this is a very quick overview. Don't worry, you'll get more detail in the next 2 videos. So that 4-year period saw the death of Weimar democracy and the establishment of Hitler's dictatorship. Hitler himself was undeniably a political genius, but was helped to power by members of the conservative elites. And we'll look at that again in more detail. The economic and social circumstances of the Great Depression were certainly exploited by the Nazis more ably through propaganda and energy and organisation than other parties. That helped to increase their vote, alongside a desire for strong authoritarian government among the German people, especially as democracy had essentially broken down and didn't seem to be working during the Great Depression. This, alongside fears of communism, certainly are factors that help propel Hitler towards the dictatorship. Let's have a little bit of a look at some of the help he received from the elite. So the political elite themselves were largely conservative, not huge fans of democracy, wanted a return to traditional authoritarian government. They were looking for someone to head the government. Hitler is actually one of several candidates. What helped Hitler and the Nazis is that they did exploit, as I said, the circumstances of the Great Depression with more effective propaganda, energy and organisations, which helped them to electoral success in 1932. They were a high-profile party. In fact, though, Hindenburg was reluctant to appoint Hitler, and several chancellors were given a chance, before Hitler was finally appointed. This is a statement, a phrase, which you're going to need to be aware of. This is from the historian Alan Bullock. Hitler was jobbed into power by backstairs intrigue. Intrigue is plotting behind the scenes, it's backstabbing, it's making arrangements. And you'll see in the next couple of videos how that really helps Hitler into power, alongside a range of other factors. So in January 1933, Hindenburg was persuaded to appoint Hitler as Chancellor. Remember, at this stage though, he's got the Chancellorship, but he is just a chancellor, he is not yet a dictator. The feeling amongst Hindenburg and the members of the conservative elites that had, through the backstairs intrigue, persuaded Hindenburg to appoint Hitler, the feeling was that Hitler could be controlled. After all, out of the government, there are only 3 Nazis, including Hitler, out of 12 ministers. This was a serious miscalculation. Hitler and the Nazis then, over the next 18 months, took power with amazing speed. Within 6 months, all political opposition was destroyed. Other political parties were banned. Within the next 6 months, the power of the federal governments of Germany, not the federal, that's the main one, sorry, the power of the regional governments of Germany, the Länder, was smashed. They were replaced by Nazi Gauleiters. Within the next 6 months, he crushed all opposition from within his own party. Once he'd achieved power, Hitler could then focus on his 3 main aims. The first was to build a Volksgemeinschaft, or national community. Again, apologies to any German speakers for my horrible pronunciation there. The thing about this national community is it meant that he had intentions to deal with those who did not belong. Things like Jewish people, disabled people, homosexuals, communists, and they would not be dealt with kindly. His third and final aim was to achieve Lebensraum and destroy communism, which would mean inevitably war. Let's have a brief look at the period of Nazi Germany from 1934 to 1939. We've already talked about this Volksgemeinschaft, one united national community with no class, religious or political or regional differences. He wanted to be united along racial, national lines, this mythical concept of an Aryan race. He wanted all aspects of German life, every organisation in the public and private sphere would rerun along Nazi ideals and beliefs. Goebbels, if you remember, he sort of came behind Hitler, as it were, sorry, in the 1926 Bamberg conference. He became eventually in charge of propaganda and indoctrination, and this was aimed at every sector of German society. So young children, working men and women, propaganda, indoctrination aimed at every German. Although it's important to remember that not every German did fall prey to the Nazi propaganda and Nazi beliefs. Initially, Hitler was relatively popular. He'd got rid of a Weimar democracy that had seemed not to be working. He had a strong united rule, seemed to some achievements, things like the remilitarization of the Rhineland and so on. They restored German pride. Unemployment was reduced, partly because of vast spending on armaments as well as public works. By some, he was seen indeed as a saviour. However, there was undeniably a very dark side to the agenda, even before the Second World War and the horrors of the Holocaust. The national community, as I've already said, included Aryans only. Hitler believed in a misunderstanding, a misappropriation, a perversion of Darwinian theory of evolution and natural selection. He believed of a war between the races, particularly between Aryan and Slavic people. He believed that war with the USSR was inevitable, and he believed the Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe, of Poland and of Russia, to be polluted by Jews. Notice this heavily emotive language here, polluted. Russia had fallen to communism in 1917, and Hitler regarded communism as a Jewish disease. He believed in the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that Jewish people had invented communism in inverted commas, and also invented capitalism, which is a strange and contradictory conspiracy theory. Okay, so Germany at war, 1939 to 1945. Hitler actually never explained his aims in detail to his generals. He kind of, in some ways, made it up as he went along. Certainly didn't explain it to the German people. And in fact, as war broke out, a lot of Germans did fear the worst. War is indeed a very serious thing to embark upon. But in the success periods of Blitzkrieg of 1939 and 1940, as German armies very overran Poland and France, Western Europe and so forth, the Low Countries, people became less fearful. In 1941, though, bit of a turning point. Well, not a bit of a turning point, a major turning point. the invasion of the Soviet Union, and Hitler declared war on the United States in December of 1941. And opposition feeling grew within Germany, although there were no mass coordinated attempts to overthrow the regime. Accounts from the front, though, undermined propaganda as people started to realise that things were not going Germany's way. Hitler himself, in fact, was rarely seen in public after 1943, and the regime did become more unpopular. Or there were some plots against Hitler, although there was no wide coordinated attempt to overthrow the regime. Let's have a look at the end of the Third Reich. There were some assassination attempts. This gentleman here on the right is Klaus von Stauffenberg, a member of the failed bomb plot on Hitler. But by 1945, the writing was on the wall. Soviet tanks had reached Berlin in the spring of 1945, and in April, Hitler committed suicide. A month later, the Germans surrendered, and the so-called Thousand-Year Reich had ended after, let's do my maths, 13 years of Nazi rule. I made some decent notes. Oh, sorry, there's a picture of Hitler, clearly after his demise. Just to summarise, helped into power really largely by the elite, as well as a range of circumstances, the Great Depression, effective propaganda, etc., but helped by the elite being very significant, and not in fact the first choice though. Appointed by Hindenburg in January of 1930 as Chancellor, and from that point, between 1933 and 1934, took power gradually, but rapidly, to become dictator. Believed in a national community, which included so-called Aryans, but not Jews and other undesirables. Initially popular throughout the period of economic prosperity and the early phase of the war, the dark side of the agenda, of course, the inevitability of war according to Hitler's beliefs, and the fall of the Third Reich. Okay, so I hope you need some decent notes.